What is true power? Is it having the loudest voice in the room, or the most eloquent arguments? Or is power an endless battle of words, where the most convincing speaker wins? Today's story takes us to medieval Scotland. We will witness how a young knight overturned traditional rules in the royal court, when all the influence was in his rival's hands. With a lesson he learned from his own humiliation, he would develop a strategy to let his actions speak louder than any argument ever could. This story will reveal the most important secret of influence, a secret discovered 700 years ago, but still used by the most successful leaders and innovators in today's competitive world. It is not those who argue for their ideas who win, but those who prove their worth through undeniable results. In the misty highlands of medieval Scotland, where ancient stones bore witness to 1,000 battles and every glen echoed with tales of courage and conquest, there lived a truth more valuable than all the gold in the royal treasury. In a world where words are cheap and boasts are common, the one who speaks through actions commands a respect that no argument can ever achieve. For when knights and nobles compete for honor through grand speeches and elaborate claims, the warrior who lets his deeds do the talking becomes the master of them all. The year was 1314. 3 months after Robert the Bruce's victory at Bannockburn had secured Scottish independence, and the royal court at Stirling Castle was filled with knights seeking to rebuild their reputations after years of warfare. Among them, a young knight named Sir Duncan MacLeod faced a challenge that would test not only his skill at arms, but his understanding of how true respect is earned in a world where everyone talks, but few deliver. At 26, Duncan possessed the combat skills that marked him as one of the finest warriors of his generation. He could handle sword and lance with deadly precision, had mastered the tactical knowledge needed to command men in battle, and possessed the kind of steady courage that made him reliable in the chaos of combat. But in the hierarchical world of the Scottish court, where established knights had spent decades building their reputations through famous deeds and royal favor, skill alone was not enough to secure the recognition he sought. The problem Duncan faced was both simple and seemingly insurmountable. The senior knights at court, men like Sir William Douglas and Sir James Stuart, had earned their positions through years of service and battlefield glory. They formed an exclusive circle that controlled access to the most prestigious military commands, the most profitable lands, and the king's closest confidence. Meanwhile, Duncan found himself relegated to minor duties and ceremonial roles, despite his obvious competence. The traditional approach for an ambitious young knight would have been to seek opportunities to prove himself through formal challenges, tournament victories, or eloquent presentations of his qualifications to the king and his advisors. But Duncan quickly discovered that the established knights had little interest in providing such opportunities to potential rivals, and King Robert was too preoccupied with the complex task of governing a newly independent nation to pay attention to every young knight seeking advancement. Duncan's frustration reached its peak during a council meeting in late autumn, when King Robert was discussing the problem of English raiders who had been attacking settlements along the border. The established knights offered the usual solutions: mount punitive expeditions, strengthen border fortifications, negotiate with English lords for better control of their territories. But Duncan could see that these conventional approaches would be slow, expensive, and likely ineffective against raiders who could strike quickly and disappear into the wilderness. He knew that a more aggressive strategy was needed: small, mobile forces that could track and intercept the raiders before they reached Scottish territory, combined with intelligence networks that could provide advance warning of planned attacks. But when Duncan attempted to present these ideas during the council meeting, Sir William Douglas cut him off with barely concealed irritation. "Young MacLeod," Douglas said with the tone of a parent addressing an over-enthusiastic child, "these matters require experience and judgment that come only with years of proven service. Perhaps you should focus on mastering the duties appropriate to your current station before presuming to advise your betters on matters of strategy." The other senior knights chuckled appreciatively, and King Robert moved on to other business without acknowledging Duncan's attempted contribution. But rather than becoming angry or defensive, Duncan simply nodded respectfully and remained silent for the rest of the meeting. He had learned something valuable. In this environment, arguing for his ideas would only reinforce the perception that he was presumptuous and unworthy of serious consideration. That evening, as Duncan walked the battlements of Stirling Castle and looked out over the darkening countryside, he reached a decision that would transform not only his own career, but his understanding of how influence actually works in hierarchical organizations. Instead of continuing to seek permission to prove himself, he would simply begin proving himself through actions that spoke louder than any words ever could. The next morning, Duncan requested a private audience with the king, not to present strategic proposals or argue for better assignments, but to make a simple request. He asked for permission to take a small group of volunteers on reconnaissance missions along the border, ostensibly to gather intelligence about English raider activities, but actually to begin implementing his anti-raider strategy without announcing it as such. King Robert, perhaps impressed by Duncan's restrained response to the previous day's humiliation, granted the request. Within a week, Duncan had assembled a team of 12 experienced soldiers who shared his frustration with the passive approach to border defense. But rather than presenting their mission as a revolutionary new strategy, Duncan simply described it as routine patrol work that would provide valuable information to support the decisions of their superiors. The first expedition lasted 2 weeks and yielded results that exceeded even Duncan's expectations. By moving quickly and quietly through terrain that larger forces couldn't navigate, his small team was able to track a group of English raiders back to their base camp across the border. More importantly, they gathered detailed intelligence about the raiders' methods, timing, and planned targets for future attacks. When Duncan submitted his report to the Royal Council, he presented it not as vindication of his strategic ideas, but simply as information that might be useful for planning purposes. The report was detailed, professional, and completely focused on facts rather than recommendations. It described the raiders' tactics, identified their likely routes and targets, and provided maps showing their base camps and supply lines. But Duncan made no speeches about the superiority of his approach or the shortcomings of conventional border defense. The senior knights were forced to acknowledge that Duncan had gathered valuable intelligence through methods they hadn't considered. Sir William Douglas, in particular, seemed impressed despite himself by the quality and detail of the information. But more importantly, King Robert began to see Duncan as someone who could deliver results rather than just opinions. Over the following months, Duncan continued to lead these reconnaissance missions, each time bringing back intelligence that proved increasingly valuable for royal decision-making. But he also began to do something more ambitious. He started using the intelligence his team gathered to anticipate and intercept raider attacks before they could reach Scottish territory. The first interception was almost accidental. Duncan's team encountered a group of English raiders while conducting routine surveillance and engaged them in a running battle that ended with the raiders fleeing back across the border without accomplishing their mission. When Duncan reported the encounter, he described it simply as a fortunate opportunity to gather additional intelligence about enemy tactics rather than as a successful implementation of proactive border defense. But the second interception was clearly intentional. and its success could not be dismissed as mere luck. Duncan's intelligence network had identified a planned raid on a wealthy monastery near the border, and his team positioned themselves to ambush the raiders at the optimal point along their route. The resulting battle was swift and decisive. 8 raiders killed, 4 captured, and their leader forced to flee, wounded back into England. The captured prisoners provided information that led to the disruption of 2 additional planned raids, and word of Duncan's success began to spread throughout the Scottish borderlands. Local lords who had previously seen their territories as vulnerable to English attack began to request Duncan's assistance in protecting their holdings. More importantly, King Robert began to assign Duncan increasingly important missions that went far beyond simple reconnaissance. But throughout this process, Duncan maintained his policy of letting his actions speak for themselves. When courtiers praised his successes, he redirected credit to his men and to the quality of intelligence they had gathered. When rival knights questioned his methods, he responded not with arguments, but with results. When King Robert asked for his opinions on border defense strategy, Duncan offered practical suggestions based on field experience rather than theoretical knowledge. The transformation in Duncan's status was gradual but unmistakable. Within 6 months, he had gone from being dismissed as an inexperienced young knight to being recognized as one of the most effective military commanders in the kingdom. But this recognition had come not through political maneuvering or eloquent presentations, but through a consistent pattern of delivering results that others had failed to achieve. The defining moment came during the spring of 1315, when English forces launched a coordinated assault on 3 Scottish border towns simultaneously. The attack was more sophisticated than previous raids, involving nearly 200 professional soldiers rather than the small bands of opportunistic raiders that Duncan had been intercepting. Traditional Scottish response would have required mobilizing large forces and mounting counterattacks that would take days to organize and execute. But Duncan was ready with a different approach. His intelligence network had provided advance warning of the planned assault, and he had positioned small, mobile response teams at strategic locations throughout the border region. When the English attacks began, Duncan's forces were able to respond immediately, harassing the attackers and disrupting their coordination, while conventional Scottish forces mobilized for a larger response. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with complete Scottish victory. The English forces were not only repelled, but suffered heavy casualties that discouraged similar large-scale attacks for years to come. More importantly, the speed and effectiveness of the Scottish response demonstrated capabilities that surprised even King Robert and his senior advisors. In the council meeting that followed the victory, Sir William Douglas stood to address the assembled knights and nobles. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying a respect that had been entirely absent from his previous interactions with Duncan. "I believe we owe Sir Duncan MacLeod a debt of gratitude for developing defensive capabilities that none of us fully understood or appreciated." King Robert nodded slowly, then turned to Duncan. "Sir Duncan, it appears that your reconnaissance missions have evolved into something considerably more significant than we initially realized. Would you be willing to expand these operations and take formal command of our border defense strategy?" Duncan's response was characteristic of the approach that had brought him to this moment. Rather than celebrating his vindication or pointing out how his ideas had been initially dismissed, he simply accepted the assignment and began discussing practical matters of implementation. He outlined the resources he would need, the personnel requirements for expanding his operations, and the timeline for establishing comprehensive border security. But perhaps most importantly, Duncan used his new position not to exclude or diminish the senior knights who had previously dismissed him, but to demonstrate how his methods could enhance and support their existing responsibilities. He showed Sir William Douglas how improved intelligence gathering could make traditional military operations more effective. He worked with Sir James Stewart to integrate mobile response capabilities with conventional border fortifications. This collaborative approach accomplished something that confrontational tactics never could have achieved. It transformed potential enemies into allies and created a unified defensive strategy that was more effective than anything any individual commander could have developed alone. The senior knights began to see Duncan not as a threat to their authority, but as a valuable colleague whose innovations enhanced their own effectiveness. Within a year, Duncan's border defense system had become the model for Scottish military operations throughout the kingdom. Young knights from across Scotland requested assignments to his command, eager to learn methods that had proven so remarkably successful. Foreign observers traveled to study Scottish defensive innovations, and English military commanders began adapting their own strategies to account for capabilities they had never previously encountered. But the most significant transformation was in Duncan's relationship with King Robert himself. The king had begun to rely on Duncan not just for border defense, but for strategic advice on a wide range of military and political matters. This trust had been earned not through lobbying or political maneuvering, but through a consistent pattern of delivering results that exceeded expectations while remaining loyal and respectful toward established authority. Duncan's story began to spread beyond Scotland's borders, carried by diplomats and merchants who witnessed the transformation of Scottish defensive capabilities. The tale of the young knight who had revolutionized border defense through actions rather than arguments became a model for ambitious warriors throughout medieval Europe, though few understood the psychological sophistication that underlay Duncan's apparently straightforward approach. The key insight that Duncan had discovered was that in hierarchical organizations, the most effective way to challenge existing methods is not through direct confrontation or intellectual argument, but through the gradual demonstration of superior results. People who feel threatened by new ideas will often resist them regardless of their merit. But people who see practical benefits from new approaches will eventually embrace them, even if they initially oppose them. More importantly, Duncan had learned that the goal of innovation should not be to prove others wrong, but to make everyone more successful. By positioning his new methods as enhancements to existing approaches rather than replacements for them, he had avoided creating the kind of zero-sum competition that destroys promising innovations before they can prove their worth. Years later, when Duncan had become one of King Robert's most trusted advisors and his defensive strategies had helped secure Scotland's independence for a generation, younger knights would ask him about the secret of his rapid rise to prominence. His answer was always the same. In a world where everyone talks about what should be done, the person who simply does it will always have an insurmountable advantage. Arguments, Duncan would tell them, create opposition even when you're right. But results create followers even among people who initially disagreed with you. The battlefield doesn't care about your theories or your eloquence. It only responds to what actually works. And when you consistently deliver what works, people stop questioning your methods and start asking you to teach them. This philosophy extended far beyond military strategy. Duncan applied the same principles to every aspect of his career and personal relationships, always choosing to demonstrate value rather than assert it, to show capability rather than claim it, and to let the quality of his work speak more loudly than any words ever could. The approach proved so effective that it influenced Scottish military culture for generations. The tradition of showing, not telling, became deeply embedded in Scottish warrior culture, creating a military establishment that prized practical effectiveness over theoretical knowledge and valued commanders who could deliver results under pressure rather than those who could offer impressive explanations for why results were difficult to achieve. In our modern world of endless debates and constant arguments about the best approaches to every challenge, this medieval wisdom has never been more relevant. We live in an age where people spend enormous amounts of time and energy trying to convince others that their ideas are superior, often creating resistance and opposition that makes implementation impossible, even when the ideas themselves have genuine merit. The most successful entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders of our time are those who have learned to apply the same principles that guided Duncan over 700 years ago. They understand that in a noisy world full of competing theories and opinions, the ultimate advantage belongs to those who can consistently deliver results that speak for themselves. This doesn't mean avoiding all discussion or input from others, but rather recognizing that the most persuasive argument is always a successful demonstration. When you can show that your approach works, not in theory, but in practice, not in ideal conditions, but in the real world with all its complications and constraints, you create a form of influence that no amount of eloquence or logic can match. Whether you're trying to advance in your career, build a successful business, lead a team through challenging circumstances, or simply gain respect in your community, the principles of action-based influence remain as powerful today as they were in medieval Scotland. Focus on delivering results rather than winning arguments. Demonstrate value rather than asserting it. And let your work create the evidence that others can see and verify for themselves. For on the windswept battlements of Stirling Castle, Sir Duncan MacLeod learned that the greatest victories are not won through superior rhetoric or more convincing arguments, but through the simple and undeniable power of results that speak louder than any words ever could. And in that understanding lies a timeless secret of influence. When your actions consistently exceed your promises, you transform from someone who talks about success into someone who creates it.